The wild boar barreled through the Elias like a hairy battering ram, squealing and furious as chaos erupted at the Brook Haven Commons ice cream social. Kids screamed, lawn chairs flew, and Karen Molrun, HOA president and recently self-appointed wildlife coordinator, leapt onto a picnic table, clutching a can of LaCroix as if it were bear mace. Too bad she'd confiscated my gear the day before. Too bad I was the only reason we hadn't already been overrun. I'm Miles Renner, former Army Ranger, current UPS driver, lover of silence, bourbon, and Saturday afternoon bow maintenance. I moved to Brook Haven Commons 3 years ago because it had what I wanted: trees, space, and a detached garage to store my gear. What I didn't want was drama. Unfortunately, I lived across from Karen Molrun. Karen was the HOA president, newsletter editor, and self-declared protector of suburban values. Her obsessions included hydrangea symmetry, leaf blower hours, and enforcing an informal dress code that forbade camo. The moment she spotted my tree stand behind the shed, it was like I'd parked a tank on the front lawn. She started slow. A warning letter for aggressive yard decor arrived first. Then a citation for outdoor weaponry display, which turned out to be my compound bow on a maintenance rack in my own backyard. The rack was behind my privacy fence, mind you, but Karen had apparently stood on a lawn chair to peer over. Then she called a special meeting and floated the phrase, anti-poacher policy, with all the gravitas of someone unveiling a new constitution. I tried to explain at that meeting. There was a boar problem developing in our area. I'd seen tracks along the tree line, rooting damage in the common areas, and even caught one on my trail cam snuffling near the HOA's patent court at 2 o'clock in the morning. I wasn't hunting for sport. I was monitoring the situation, preparing to guard the neighborhood if necessary. Wild boars were moving into suburban areas across the state, and our development backed up to 300 acres of preserve. Karen's response was delivered with the self-righteousness of a televangelist condemning sin. She proclaimed that weapons have no place in a family-friendly community and that my military background clearly made me prone to seeing threats where there were none. The other board members, including Gerald Hawkins, who once asked me to help him sight his deer rifle, sat silent as church mice. 2 days later, she marched over to my property, flanked by 2 HOA volunteers in matching purple polos. One was holding a clipboard like a shield, the other recording on his phone. Karen demanded I surrender any offensive gear, in the spirit of community tranquility. When I asked what authority she had to confiscate private property, she waved a freshly printed document claiming emergency powers to remove hazardous materials from the neighborhood. They took my trail cams, my bow, my arrows, even my camo pattern cooler, which she insisted promoted a culture of violence. I could have resisted, but I decided to let her dig her own hole. I carefully documented everything, took photos of them removing items from my property, and made sure to get her signature on the confiscation receipt she proudly produced. As they wheeled my gear away in a garden cart, Karen announced with a triumphant smile that the items would be stored in the HOA shed until I came to my senses and moved to a more appropriate neighborhood. Gerald Hawkins caught my eye and shook his head slightly, but said nothing. 2 nights later, the boars arrived in force. A trio of them rooted through Mrs. Lampley's prize-winning dahlias, sending mulch flying like shrapnel. They crashed through her ceramic birdbath, reducing it to rubble, and knocked over a decorative retaining wall that had cost the HOA $1,500 to install. The security cameras caught it all, including Karen's response when she was called to the scene at 5 in the morning. She stood there in her monogrammed bathrobe, insisting they were just raccoons with poor posture, and that there was no need to panic. The next evening was the HOA's monthly ice cream social, a sacred tradition that Karen treated like a state dinner. She had personally selected the flavors, arranged the toppings bar by color, and sent 3 reminder emails about proper Sunday etiquette. The jazz quartet was playing, children were laughing, and for about 20 minutes, everything seemed perfect. Then a full-grown boar, easily 200 pounds with tusks gleaming like yellow daggers, charged through the hedge and sent the dessert table flying. Chaos erupted instantly. One brave child hurled rainbow sprinkles at the beast. A man named Dennis fainted backward into a vat of homemade vanilla. Karen shrieked the word anarchy at a volume that made dogs bark 3 blocks away and threw a gluten-free cone like a grenade. The boar, unimpressed by her dessert-based defense, began rooting through the scattered ice cream containers, occasionally snorting at anyone who got too close. I quickly ushered kids behind the gazebo and helped Dennis out of the ice cream. One elderly man kept insisting the boar was a demon sent to punish us for switching to sugar-free options. Karen was now standing on a bench, waving a serving spoon and shouting contradictory orders. She demanded everyone remain calm while screaming at the top of her lungs. She insisted the situation was under control while backing away from the boar. When someone suggested calling 911, she yelled that involving outside authorities would damage property values. I knew what had to be done. I sprinted toward the HOA shed where all my gear was locked up. Karen saw me coming and tried to block the door, spreading her arms wide like a scarecrow. I reminded her in a very calm voice that she had confiscated safety equipment and that if anyone got gored by that boar, her laminated power trip would be Exhibit A in the lawsuit. I also mentioned that several people were recording this incident on their phones. She moved aside so fast she nearly fell off the shed's wooden platform. I quickly retrieved my compound bow and tranquilizer arrows, items I legally own for exactly this type of wildlife emergency. The tranquilizer equipment was properly registered with the state wildlife department, something Karen would have known if she'd bothered to ask. Loading an arrow with practiced efficiency, I moved back toward the chaos. The boar had cornered the jazz quartet, who were using their instruments as shields. I took careful aim, accounting for wind and the moving target, and released. The tranquilizer arrow struck the boar perfectly in the thick muscle of its shoulder. The beast stumbled, squealed once more, then collapsed peacefully onto the bocce court, narrowly missing the championship trophy from last year's tournament. The crowd burst into spontaneous applause. Someone started chanting my name. Gerald Hawkins shouted that I deserved a medal. Karen collapsed onto a folding chair like a deflated balloon. Animal control arrived within 30 minutes and confirmed what I'd been trying to tell everyone. This was a known rogue sow from the nearby preserve, aggressive and highly territorial. She'd been spotted in 3 other neighborhoods and was responsible for thousands of dollars in property damage. The officer, a no-nonsense woman named Patricia Santos, took my statement and reviewed the trail cam footage I'd saved on my phone from before the confiscation. She was particularly interested in Karen's confiscation of safety equipment. Officer Santos made several notes on her tablet, muttering about liability and reckless endangerment. The HOA board called an emergency meeting that night. Gerald Hawkins, finally finding his backbone, made a motion to review Karen's actions. The vote was unanimous. Karen was cited by the county for unauthorized confiscation of safety equipment under Statute 473.2. The fine was $5,000. She was also fined by the HOA board itself for reckless endangerment of residents, another $3,000. Her newsletter duties were immediately revoked after someone pointed out she'd used the last issue to publish a manifesto about the dangers of toxic masculinity in lawn care. But the real blow came when her position as HOA president was put to an immediate vote of no confidence. The vote was 37-1, with Karen being the lone dissenter. When the results were announced, she stood up so fast her chair tipped over. Her face turned the exact shade of purple as those volunteer polos. She opened her mouth, closed it, opened it again, then let out a sound that was half sob, half air raid siren. $8,000 in fines and stripped of her title in one night. She stumbled out of the community center, clutching her presidential gavel that no one had bothered to ask her to return.